What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another AEW retrospective video here on this channel. And this time we are going from Full Gear of 2022 all the way up until Revolution 2024 and what's been going on. Now, obviously, I'm not going to cover everything, and I'm just going to try to get to like the main highlights and basically the champions and the storylines that they were in. So without further ado, let's just get started. All right, this one isn't as long as the last one that I put, which was about 2 years ago, which, holy shit, it doesn't even feel like it's been that long, but here we are. So we're going to start with the mid-card title. All right, so we have the International Championship. Orange Cassidy, basically, he's had it since Full Gear of 2022, but we've had some bumps here and there since then. So last year I said that title, it was not needed. Basically a consolation prize for Pac. I keep forgetting what they call him, if it's Pac or Pac.
Oh, I thought you were getting stuck on whether it's Pac or Pac.
No, I was going to say, is it Bastard or Bastard?
Yeah.
Now, I will say the less titles, the better, but Orange Cassidy's reign with this belt was one of the best championship runs in the last couple of years in all of wrestling. And I put this up against like any promotion anywhere, especially at the end. A lot of defenses were not needed in the beginning, but he had matches that are just completely forgettable at the start. Like, do you remember that he faced Trent Seven? Probably not, right? He had a few with Jay Lethal and Jeff Jarrett that could be forgotten, mostly because of Jarrett. I still don't know why he's on TV as much as he is. They changed the name of the belt from All Atlantic to International after a match that he had against Jarrett. After that feud, he went on to Double or Nothing, where he was put in a battle royal to defend the belt. Came down to him and Swerve Strickland. This is where I think the reign started to feel bigger. I know that he had a match also with Murphy, or Buddy Matthews, that was also like another one of those instances where you were like, you know what? I think that one and this one against Swerve Strickland, both of those matches I think were like the first times that you were like, you know what? I think they could be switching the title here. Orange Cassidy made it through Swerve Strickland though after a good match, the start of many more to come on the back half of this reign. Next up, there will be a four-way defense against Shibata, Daniel Garcia, and Zack Sabre Jr. at Forbidden Door. Another good match, but why was Cassidy the only one made to defend his belt? Anyways, after this, he started doing random defenses again, which didn't make sense, like against Lance Archer, Johnny TV, and Aaron Solo. Probably forgot about those as well, but those were just like randomly thrown in for no reason. He was involved in a feud with his best friends and the Blackpool Combat Club, which would eventually lead to his end for the first title reign. He was able to beat Wheeler Yuta and retain the title, which, good. The less of Yuta, the better for me. I think Wheeler should have been put in the Sports Entertainer stable with the JAS, and Daniel Garcia should have been in the BCC. I think that's just how they should have gone instead of the way that they did it. Daniel Garcia, I think, would have been able to fit in either stable, but to get like a little bit more out of Wheeler, he should have been put with Jericho. But the feud between the Best Friends and the BCC led to a Stadium Stampede match at All In, record-breaking crowd of 85,000 people. I've come to appreciate that about AEW hardcore matches. It's just all over the place, which, if you think about it, makes more sense instead of everything being choreographed in what's supposed to be a street fight. Orange Cassidy then had one final successful defense against one of his teammates from that All-In match, that being Pentagon. It was a good TV match on Dynamite, which led up to Jon Moxley facing the winner of this said match at the following pay-per-view All Out in Chicago, which, let's get this out of the way now. Fuck AEW for putting pay-per-views on back-to-back weekends. I don't care if you give us great matches every pay-per-view. If there is no backstory to the match, I'll just go watch UFC. Wrestling works best when there's a storyline attached to the feud. Also, if you don't give us any story, why should we tune in to the weekly shows? Why have Dynamite and Collision at that point? Just put on pay-per-views for $50 with no reasoning and see how far that goes. You're gonna run out of dream matches quick. You know, storylines can help a matchup feel more important than it otherwise would be. Adam Page is a good example. I don't mean to like hate on Adam Page, but the style that he has in the ring, that needs a storyline behind it to make people care about it. For example, Adam Page versus Colt Cabana, just a random match, nobody's gonna blink an eye. But Adam Page versus Colt Cabana, maybe to be the leader of the Dark Order, now that has a reason and more people are interested about it. Who knows what they would do with that, but on paper, you give me that, I'm in, as opposed to there not being a storyline at all. I could come up with other examples, but for the sake of keeping this short, let's just move on. Point being, build the pay-per-view, don't let the pay-per-view be the build, if that makes sense. Jon Moxley, though, ended up beating Cassidy for the International Championship at All Out. I thought this was a good person to end the reign of Cassidy. If it wasn't going to be a new guy getting the rub from beating Cassidy, the next best thing was going to be to give it to somebody that was already established to keep the prestige of the title going. Moxley went out to defend the title against some randoms before dropping it to Rey Fenix at Grand Slam. The reason for this quick change was due to injury, and then Rey Fenix was also injured, so they decided just to put the title back on Orange Cassidy, and at Full Gear, he put the belt back on the line against Jon Moxley in a rematch, but this time Cassidy was able to retain. This second reign has been going on for about 4 to 5 months now. It doesn't feel as big as the first time. At times, you forget that Orange Cassidy is even the champion. At Revolution, he's going to be facing Roderick Strong, and just to make that stable a little bit more credible, the Undisputed Kingdom that is, I could see Cassidy losing it here and giving the Undisputed Kingdom more gold. As for Cassidy, he will probably just go back to doing 6-man tags. He has been tagging with Hook and the returning Danhausen on Rampage, which I think is a huge downgrade from where he was 6 months ago. Orange Cassidy, that is. And I'm sorry, but Danhausen is cringe. I try to give it a chance. It's been 2 years. I still don't get it. I kind of got the appeal before he came to AEW, but ever since, I just don't understand. And then Hook has also lost a little bit of what made him interesting when he debuted. Him speaking doesn't help either. Just keep him quiet. Like, low-key, I think somebody with social anxiety would be able to cut a better promo live in front of a sold-out arena more than what Hook has been able to do, even in pre-recorded segments. Like, all the promos that I've seen from Hook, I cannot remember any of them, and I think for the most part they've all been pretty bad. But yeah, it's crazy to see how AEW can't keep the momentum for guys when their time is up. Like, once they get their big win or lose after a long run on top, they just fade away. Like, they go on to do nothing. Obviously, they're not going to do that with Moxley or Danielson or MJF. But somebody like Cassidy, he's probably going to go back to doing nothing. Just let him go away, let him be missed, and then just have him come back to a big pop. And I'm going to be covering Revolution at the end of this video. So, at the time of this recording, I don't know if Cassidy has lost, but I think he's going to. Just move him to another feud or keep him away. So, now we're done talking about the international title. Let's move on to talking about the other mid-card championship, the TNT title. So we move on to talking about the Wardlow TNT title scene since at least Full Gear 2022. Actually, it was Samoa Joe, but we had Samoa Joe, Darby Allin, Samoa Joe again, Wardlow, Powerhouse Hobbs, Wardlow, Luchasaurus. 7 title changes in 7 months, and 7 reigns I could really skip over and nobody would even notice. Now, that might be over-exaggerating, but from Full Gear 2022 until now, the only memorable reign has been the most recent one with Christian Cage, which really started when Luchasaurus won the belt in June on the debut episode of Collision. But let's break it down really quick. Samoa Joe won the belt in November of 2022 and then lost it to Darby Allin in January, and then he won it back in February. 50-50 booking at its finest. I thought only Vince McMahon and WWE knew how to do that, but I guess I was wrong. They had a great TV match on Dynamite where Joe won the belt back, and obviously the reason there for Joe being the champion again was for Wardlow to come back and get his revenge. But I don't understand why they had Darby be champion during this time. Darby could have been just like a guy that they gave to Joe to feud with while they waited for Wardlow to come back. And then obviously when Wardlow would come back and beat Joe, that reign was just going to be a little bit longer than it was, instead of it being like a couple weeks long. And obviously that would keep Joe strong as well because he wouldn't have lost any matches since Full Gear. You would have just waited for Wardlow to come back and beat him for the championship. But anyways, Wardlow has the belt again. This second reign for sure is going to be a reset that he needed, right? Nope. He loses to Powerhouse Hobbs 3 days later after winning the belt. What the fuck is going on? Like, Hobbs is a worthy challenger, no question. But 3 days? Wardlow could not be at a lower point in his career in AEW at this point. But not to be outdone, Hobbs would come to lose the belt a month later to Wardlow. Third time's the charm, as they say. If none of this makes sense, or if it feels like I'm leaving out details, don't worry, I am not. I felt the same way the whole time watching this in real time. After 4 different champions, we ended up in the same place we were a year earlier with Wardlow as champion in 2022. No direction, and not even the champion felt like he was a bigger deal or in a better spot because he was the champion. Christian Cage, however, would change that. We hadn't seen Christian since around All Out 2022, at least in the ring because he was injured, but he returned in early 2023 to end his feud with Jungle Boy. They had a great Buried Alive match at Revolution, but Christian came out on the losing end. That would send Jack Perry to feud for the world title at Double or Nothing. Christian would challenge but failed to beat Wardlow at Double or Nothing. Luchasaurus, though, would get the next shot on the first episode of Collision. Luchasaurus was able to do what Christian couldn't, and he beat Wardlow for the title. Christian would go around claiming that he was the champion, while having Luchasaurus do all his dirty work. During the summer, Christian would start feuding with Darby Allin, who was also feuding with Swerve Strickland. Darby would feud with Christian on Collision and with Swerve on Dynamite. What Mick Foley was to WWE in the Attitude Era, I think Darby is to AEW right now. Just going out there with anyone and putting his body on the line for our entertainment. Reminds me a lot of Mick Foley and Jeff Hardy, really, to be honest, but I wonder how many people are going to hate that I said that. And also at this time, Darby introduced his protege to AEW, Nick Wayne. AR Fox also had a brief cameo when he betrayed Darby, and he joined the Mogul Embassy, or whatever that stable was being called. They laid out Nick Wayne where he trained. That led into a match where Darby and Nick Wayne beat Swerve and AR Fox, and this would actually end AR Fox's time in the spotlight. Such a short little run. Strickland would kick him out after losing that tag match. And at All In, Christian Cage replaced Fox to tag with Swerve in a coffin match versus Sting and Darby. I thought AR Fox could have been a great sidekick to Swerve. I'm not sure why they kicked him out of the group. I think he might have had some real issues with getting a visa to go to England, but still, that doesn't mean you had to scrap the whole thing, especially with how brutal it was when he turned. We were supposed to just forgive him and cheer him again after what he did to a teenager and a former best friend. I mean, that was another head-scratching move from AEW in 2023. And then, at All In front of 850,000 people in attendance, Darby and Sting won the coffin match, and that would lead to a TNT title match at All Out for Darby, but he was unable to get the win. But that was not the end. There was a three-way match between Cage, Darby, and Luchasaurus on Collision, where Christian took advantage of Darby hitting Luchasaurus, hitting a coffin drop, and pinned him to get the win, and he became the TNT champion for real this time. Christian continued his great work on the mic during this feud, attacking everyone and their father, or lack thereof. He was trying to recruit Nick Wayne away from Darby and trying to turn Nick against his own mother as well. At the Wrestle Dream pay-per-view, we got Darby Allin versus Christian Cage one more time in the main event in a 2 out of 3 falls match. The end saw Nick Wayne finally turn on Darby and align himself with Christian, one of the best matches of the year. And the end to this pay-per-view also saw Adam Copeland make his debut in AEW to come to the rescue for Darby and Sting. Copeland making his debut really made anything possible in the world of free agency and wrestling. You can no longer tell me anything is impossible when it comes to long tenured stars jumping from one promotion to the other. And I think it's great. Why should one company get all the stars? This also provides a healthy balance, as we saw with Cody and Cargill, and even now Punk going to WWE. Whoever wants to be on whatever show, as long as you give me good wrestling on TV, that's all I really care about. So, I know we've seen Christian vs. Edge before, but not with guys like Sting, Darby, or Luchasaurus involved. So now with the rated R superstar on AEW, why was he there? Well, he wanted to reform his tag team for one more run with Christian, but Cage was not buying it. He's been in Copeland's shadow his whole career, and now that he was TNT champion, and on the best run of his career, he thought Adam just wanted to come in and ruin it for him. So, in one of the best endings to Dynamite, Christian told Adam to go fuck himself. This led to Copeland trying to move on and said that he would not fight Christian, but this would only last until Darby and Sting recruited him to take on Christian Cage, Luchasaurus, and Nick Wayne at Full Gear. Copeland and his team got the win, which then turned into Copeland getting a title match against Christian on an episode of Dynamite. But before this, Christian was pissed at Luchasaurus for losing at Full Gear. He made him change his name to Killswitch, and then on the same night, Copeland would come out to attack the three of them, but Cage and Luchasaurus retreated as Nick Wayne was left in the ring by himself. So Copeland had to get his revenge on someone, so he gave a concerto to Nick in front of his mother. Then the next opportunity that he had, Copeland would take out Killswitch the same way with a concerto, and then Adam would challenge Christian for his TNT title. Cage would try to play Copeland by saying that he didn't want to fight him anymore. Instead, he would be open to tag with Adam for one more run like he had mentioned when he debuted. But Adam was not buying it and saw the attack coming. He laid out Christian with a low blow and told him to go fuck himself, as they would make the match official for an episode of Dynamite in their home country of Canada. Dynamite came, and in the main event, Christian retained the belt with the help of Nick Wayne's mom. she would nail Adam with the TNT belt. This was because Adam had taken out her son with the chairs a couple weeks ago. Even though Nick was acting like an asshole towards her, obviously her motherly instinct kicked in and cost Copeland the TNT championship. If they were to rank TNT champions, I think that my top 3 would be Christian, Miro, and Brody Lee. And then like top 5, I would add like Cody's and Darby Allin's first TNT title reigns. But yeah, Christian has done a tremendous job with the championship. And I don't even know, whenever they decide to take it off him, it's going to be tough for whoever follows that. And then also notice how Christian and Copeland, they've been feuding for about 4 months, 5 months, somewhere in there. But I spent longer talking about that than the other 9 months with the TNT title. And that is because storylines do make a difference. Of course, they have to be interesting, but I'm going to take 1 month of a good storyline as opposed to 6 months of a champion just having open challenges. Now, I did give credit to Orange Cassidy. Christian's reign with the TNT title has been better TV than his whole year-long reign with the international title. Now, that's only if you wanted to compare. Both were still good for what they were, but Christian's reign has had more substance. So, we're going to see where this continues. Him and Copeland had a rematch at World's End, and he did end up winning the TNT title in an ODQ match. And then afterwards, Christian would take the opportunity from Luchasaurus, who had won a future TNT title shot. He won a contract, and they would beat down Copeland, allowing Christian to sign his name on Luchasaurus' contract, and he got an immediate rematch, which would see him regain the title right after losing it. Like, you had Adam Copeland finally getting the win here, but then you keep Christian Cage as the champion. I thought that was brilliant. Like a Money in the Bank cash-in, basically. And who started the Money in the Bank cash-ins? Edge. Full circle moment. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later about how I don't like them doing callbacks, but this was a little bit different. At Revolution, Daniel Garcia is actually going to be getting the next title shot at Christian. And this was after a match to declare a number 1 contender. But Daniel Garcia and Adam Copeland got beat down by Christian and his sons during that match. So it just ended in a no contest, but they gave the shot to Daniel Garcia at Revolution. Now they are extending this where obviously we're going to get another match between Copeland and Christian. And I'm fine with that. Like before, when this first started, I did not want this to go to 2 matches. But obviously they've gone to like 3 or 4. And I did not want to see Copeland win the title at all. Like, I didn't want to see him get that title. But the way that they did it at World's End, I mean, they gave Adam the TNT title already. So, basically, at this point, he's not a new roster member. So now, if they wanted to give him the championship and let him go with it on an actual run, I'd be fine with it. Because like I said, I don't know who would be able to take it off Christian and continue that momentum that he's had. But I think somebody like Adam Copeland could. Now, as long as he doesn't do open challenges, because he has been doing that in order to claim the rankings to get a TNT title shot again. But if he does eventually win the TNT title from Christian, that would be the only person right now that I can see continuing the Christian Cage TNT title momentum that he's given it. So, big props to Christian and what he's done with the belt. So we'll see where they take this and where they go from here with that title. Alright, so moving on, we go into the women's division, and we can probably cover this in like 5 minutes. Probably the quickest thing that we'll get through in this whole entire video. And that's not my fault, that's on them. But we start with the TBS title scene. We had Jade Cargill basically holding the TBS title for about, I don't know what it was, like 2 years or something like that. Maybe just a year, it probably felt longer. But I believe she went 60-0, and after Double or Nothing, where she had beat Taya Valkyrie. And the reason why I say I think she did was because I tried to go back and see to be sure if it was 60 wins at that point, and then if she lost 2 to Chris Statlander right after that. But for the life of me, I can't find a graphic or anything telling me that showing the 60-0 wins after Double or Nothing, after her match with Taya. But we're just going to say that she had 60 wins after that, and then Statlander returned at Double or Nothing and beat Cargill. I thought that was like the dumbest thing because she just came out of nowhere. Cargill is 60-0. Like, why didn't they build that up? And then at the next pay-per-view, you have Statlander go over. But I don't know why they did it in such a quick fashion. Now, I know Cargill eventually would leave, but it will still be a couple months. So why not extend it to maybe Forbidden Door and then have the title switch there? And then even after she beat Cargill, Statlander went on to pretty much do nothing. I'm not gonna lie though, she still has some pretty good matches here and there. Like I'll sit down and watch a Chris Statlander match any day of the week. And she was also left off of All In. I don't know if Cargill had already jumped to WWE at this point, but why not do that match there in front of 8.5 million people in attendance? And then Statlander had a defense against Ruby Soho at All Out in Chicago. And then Chris did have a rematch against Cargill where she beat her again, and that was the last time that we saw Jade on AEW before she left to WWE. So yeah, reading these notes back, I can see Cargill was still there around All In time, so do the fucking match there. I don't know what the issue was. So she did finish with a 16-2 record, the only 2 losses being to Statlander. So if they ever meet again, that will for sure be the storyline they pick up there. Who knows? By that point, Cargill might have already taken too many losses to even keep track of, and anybody won't even care at that point. So then Statlander was in a 4-way feud with Sky Blue, Willow Nightingale, and Julia Hart. Julia Hart had been doing some good work as part of the House of Black. I'm not 100% sure, but I think she sprayed all 3 of these women with mist at one point. But Sky Blue was the one who she left an impression on. At Full Gear, there was a 3-way between Statlander, Blue, and Hart, where they actually pulled the trigger on Julia and she won the TBS title. I'm not saying AEW is terrible at pulling the trigger, they just can't seem to get the job done afterwards. So now Julia Hart has moved on from Chris Statlander and has Sky Blue with her as a sidekick. Thunder Rosa recently made her return, and it looks like she's going to be the next one to feud with Julia, maybe after Revolution. And Serena Deeb also made her return, so maybe those two will maybe have a number 1 contenders match, and then the winner there will take on Julia for the TBS title, which I think could be a good proving point to see if Julia Hart can sink or swim if she goes up against one of those 2 people. I think she'll swim, and if she continues to get better, I could see her being women's champion in another 2 to 3 years, maybe even shorter, based on just the pool of talent that they have in this division. They might want to get her up there quicker. But in other women's division news, we move on from that. We go to the women's title picture. Jamie Hayter was the world champion after Full Gear 2022. She ended up getting injured. Off the top of my head, I can't really remember what she did as world champion before she vacated the title. I did do some research, and I remember that she had a banger with Sheeta on Dynamite. I think that was probably the only match that I can remember that she had that was any good. But again, she was kind of dealing with injuries, so I can't really blame her. They did tease a special partner for Saraya, also, which people thought it was going to be Mercedes Moné, but it was instead Toni Storm. They later formed a stable called The Outcast with Ruby Soho. Could have been good, but it really fell flat because they tried to make it a NWO ripoff. Ex-WWE wrestlers trying to take over the division. They even spray painted people. They put an L on their back or chest, whatever it was. And at Revolution, Jamie Hayter retained against Ruby Soho and Saraya. This was when Soho officially teamed up with Saraya and Toni Storm. I think the last time I was on here talking about AEW, I said Soho would need a lot of work before she could regain any momentum. I think they built her back up, but she keeps falling short on opportunities. But at this point, I think it's by design. They're making her the women's equivalent to like Chris Jericho back in the early 2000s, who couldn't win the big one. I think Ruby is good enough to where when she does get the big win, it can be received well by the audience. But obviously, AEW has to put in the work and make it make sense before they push her to the top. But I think she can do it. And then by Double or Nothing, Jamie Hayter was dealing with the injuries, but she still showed up to drop the belt to Toni Storm. So now it's when the title changes started to make no sense, in my opinion. Toni had just won the belt, and then they took it off her on the 200th episode of Dynamite to Hikaru Shida. But then Shida lost the belt less than a month later at All In. She lost it to Saraya, which I have no idea where Saraya keeps getting these title matches from. They gave her a feel-good story at Wembley in her home country by having her win the title. At this point, there was some dissension with the Outcast. Mainly, Toni Storm was breaking out of the group. Toni was part of the recent Soho loss to Statlander at All Out. So, logically, it would make sense for Toni to take the belt from Saraya eventually, right? Nope. Hikaru Shida randomly won the belt back, and Saraya has still been on the show, wrestling, so it couldn't have been because of an injury. I don't understand why they did the switch there. At this time, Toni Storm was building her new timeless Toni Storm character, which I think has been pretty entertaining. Toni Storm was now getting over again, which AEW saw as a chance to change the title one more time. But looking back on this, you have Saraya win the title at Wembley from Toni Storm, not Shida. It can still be a 4-way, but it ends a longer Toni Storm reign and not a short Hikaru Shida reign. Then Saraya holds the belt for 3 months through Full Gear, where timeless Toni Storm gets her title back. basically you just take Hikaru Shida out of the picture. Like, I don't understand why she had to win the belt twice. And then some people might say that we need more women's segments on AEW TV. We don't need more, we just need better. Listen, it's better than where we were in 2019/2020 with Riho and Nyla Rose, but there's still something missing. I'm fine with Toni Storm being champion right now until someone new gets over. Even Jamie Hayter, when she returns, she needs to get over again if they want her to give the title back. Don't just have her return and beat Storm out of nowhere. Keep Toni Storm as the main focus in the division, but just continue to build other women just to be ready for when Storm is finally ready to give it up. I can't see this gimmick last too long. Hopefully I'm wrong, but with wrestling fans, you never know when they're going to decide to turn on something. So at any point, you got to be ready to have somebody new if fans start turning on the Toni Storm character, unless you're going to turn her heel, which I think she is already heel, but you get my point. So next we move on to the tag teams and the trios division. And a division I never thought that AEW would struggle with, but ever since 2022 when the Young Bucks versus FTR was not the end goal for All Out, it just keeps taking some weird turns. The Acclaim were the tag team champions coming out of Full Gear 2022, and to be honest, I can't remember their reign being all that memorable. It didn't help that they feuded with Jeff Jarrett and friends for like 3 months, and then lost the tag belts randomly to the Guns, only for the Guns to drop the titles just as quick to FTR before they built up any momentum with them. Because I will say the Guns have gotten to the point where they can carry a division now, but when they won the belts back in early 2023, nobody was clamoring to see them on TV, let alone be champions. And then with FTR as champions, the tag scene did get a little bit better, at least the matches that FTR was having on Collision. Them alongside CM Punk and their feud with Bullet Club Gold was one of the best things on AEW TV in all of 2023. I don't care what you say. FTR had a stretch of time from June until September where they were undeniably the best tag team in the world. I mean, I would say they still are the best even without the tag belts, because ROH, New Japan, TNA, WWE, they don't really have any teams making a case for that distinction. So I don't even know if there is any other competition, maybe besides the Young Bucks, but they haven't been putting on good matches either, so you can't really like make a comparison at the time, you know. Obviously, like of all time, you can make an argument for who is the best, but I'm talking about right now. FTR had some great matches on Collision versus Jay White and Juice Robinson. Their match with Adam Cole and MJF was also good, especially with it having some storyline importance for MJF and Adam Cole. I heard that people didn't think their match versus the Young Bucks at All In was good compared to their other matches, but I thought it was the best one, because one, I wouldn't say the match in front of 1,500 people at Daly's Place in 2020 is a fair comparison, and two, this was for the tag belts in front of 85 million people at Wembley, so because of that, I'm going to say 2023 Bucks versus FTR was my favorite in the trilogy so far. Then, after Punk was fired in September, Collision fell off and so did FTR's reign. A coincidence? I don't think so, but that's just me. FTR started to have open challenges against random teams, and at WrestleDream, they faced off against Aussie Open, a tag team I have been impressed with whenever I saw them on AEW, but I didn't really care to see this because there was no storyline for this match, at least that AEW provided on TV weeks leading up to the pay-per-view. Notice how I said weeks, because I think they threw in like a video package on the last episode before WrestleDream. I know that they had wrestled the year prior in a match people say was amazing, but I never saw it. So anyways, FTR would lose the tag titles right after this pay-per-view to the newly formed team of Ricky Starks and Big Bill. I used to like to defend AEW against people that would say AEW didn't make sense, but after CM Punk was fired, I legit think AEW was just throwing stuff at the wall to show people that they could make anything work without Punk. But I have not been a fan of Starks and Big Bill as the tag team champions. All I have to say is go watch their interactions with Adam Copeland on Collision and their promo with Jericho and Omega. I thought Ricky could cut a promo with the best of them, but again, ever since Punk left, Ricky has just been falling flat with his mic work, which in turn rubs off to Big Bill, who also hasn't impressed anyone with his time in AEW, at least in my opinion, which if you combine all of this, it just comes off as a fail. And if you make people hate you in today's wrestling because of your mic work, you're going to have to be a wrestling god like Kenny Omega or Will Ospreay to make up for it, which I don't think either Starks or Bill are. They were supposed to take on the Bucks after a contenders match at WrestleDream, but then that turned into Jericho and Omega after they beat the Bucks at Full Gear. Then Kenny Omega got injured and Sammy returned to be with his daddy Chris Jericho. No offense to Christian Cage. He's our father, Jericho is Sammy's daddy, or so it seems with how many times that he's come back to him. Which, come on, why is Sammy a good guy again? we've been down this road many times. And also, it doesn't make sense so soon after he turned on Jericho, not only turning on him, but he kicked him in the balls. In wrestling, there should be a rule that you cannot reunite after a nut shot for at least 8 months and at least 2 matches, whichever comes first. But even after all of that, we're not getting any of these people in the title match at Revolution, because at Revolution, it's being billed as Sting's last match. Sting and Darby are going to be taking on the Young Bucks, who have also just recently turned heel. And I think them as heels is a better look on TV, because anytime that they try to be baby faces, they still just come off as pricks. But anyways, we'll see where it goes. Here's to 2024 being better with the tag team division. And with the direction they shifted to away from Ricky and Bill, I think they could be correcting this division at Revolution, no matter what the outcome is. And I finally hope that AEW's real tag teams are finally going to be the ones going after the belts in real feuds and in good matches. And when I say real feuds, I mean like storylines, weeks building up to the pay-per-view, or weeks leading up to a big Dynamite match. So I don't want to see open challenges week in, week out. But it's AEW, so that's probably actually what we're going to get, no matter who the champions are. And AEW did have a stretch where the tag division was as hot as anything else on the show. Let's see if 2024 can be a reset, and they get us back to that point with the tag teams. So we move on to the trios titles, which were cursed to start off the lineage when the Elite got suspended. But at Full Gear, Death Triangle and the Elite had a series of 7 matches. And when this first started, I didn't know how they would be able to make it go 7 and keep it interesting, but we forget that this is wrestling and they can make up their own rules. There were some stipulation matches thrown in there to make it a little bit more interesting. It ended with the Elite getting into the 7th match in a ladder match where they were able to win and be the first ever 2-time trios champions. With the amount of stables in AEW, you would think that these titles would be well off and they would have good matches, at the very least on pay-per-view. Now, it was fine at Revolution when the first pay-per-view defense for the Elite was the House of Black, but it would also be their last, as the House would win and they would be at the top of the trios division for the next couple of months into the summer. They had an on and off feud with the Acclaimed and Billy Gunn. The story there was that Billy was the reason that the team would lose, so it created doubt for Billy, and he even contemplated retiring, which he did for a short period of time, or so we thought. The House of Black, meanwhile, shifted to the good old open challenge playbook. They also started to feud with Punk and FTR, which could have been better, but was just kind of thrown together right before All In. I think that Punk and FTR versus House of Black could have been a good choice and a better match for All In instead of what they ended up doing, which was the House versus the Acclaimed once again. This time the Acclaimed got their feel-good win with badass Billy Gunn, proving that he still has it and he wasn't the weak link after all. Now, while that was all good and fine for the moment in front of 850 million people in attendance, what have they done since winning those trios titles? Open challenges, trying to befriend MJF because Max Caster has a man crush on him? Like, literally, what have they done? Again, AEW is the land of stables. The Elite, Death Triangle, BCC, Mogul Embassy, the Best Friends and Orange Cassidy, Aussie Open and Will Ospreay, Bullet Club Gold, Christian Cage and his sons, Edge, Darby, Sting, Strong in the Kingdom, LFI, I hate him, but Jeff Jarrett, Jay Lethal, and Satnam Singh. Should I keep going? Pentagon and all the luchadors that they brought in. I mean, my point being is that they have the teams, they have the trios, they have the stables, but none of them have been in a long feud that had a blow-off at a pay-per-view, except for House of Black and the Acclaimed. Now, they seem to be forming a super stable with Bullet Club Gold, when in reality they should be building this to a match at Revolution. The story writes itself there with the Guns and their dad. And also, I gotta give credit to the Guns for how much they've improved in the last year since they lost the tag titles. So, I mean, Jay White and the Guns on a pay-per-view, especially you put a story behind it against the Acclaimed, I mean, that's a pay-per-view level match in my eyes. Bullet Club Gold did win the ROH Trios titles, but who cares about those unless we're going to unify that with the AEW Trios titles. Then at that point, I'll take everything back and obviously give props to AEW, but I don't see why we have 2 sets of Trios titles on AEW TV. And then at the end of the day, I don't see why we have Trios titles at all if all the stables are just going to be in separate feuds away from the belts. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm guessing it's either going to be this. It's going to be the Acclaimed versus Bullet Club Gold. Maybe to unify the belts, maybe not. Maybe just for the AEW Trios titles. Or maybe it'll go back to where this stable started from, was them trying to get their revenge on the United Kingdom. So maybe it'll be the United Kingdom versus a combination of 3 of these guys. Yeah, but it's really been a whole bunch of nothing from the Acclaimed since winning the trios titles, because even right now and for the longest, they really haven't been defending them. So we'll see where they go after Revolution 2024. But we move on from something that didn't make any sense in the trios, tag teams, women's, TNT, international, all that stuff. There were points in time where nothing made sense, but we moved to something that did make sense, and that was MJF's title reign as world champion ever since Full Gear 2022. But before we finish off with that, let's talk about the AEW 6. Last time I kept off the review with 6 guys that I think are the main players for AEW. This year I'm going to do the same. The 6 that I've chosen this year are Bryan Danielson, CM Punk, Jon Moxley, Chris Jericho, Swerve Strickland, and MJF. And for anyone that I haven't mentioned yet, we will either talk about them here because they feuded with one of these guys, or I mentioned them earlier, or they just didn't do anything of significance since Full Gear of 2022. So let's just start off with CM Punk, because I know people don't like to hear about him anymore, but just his name alone makes him a top star no matter how long he was there for. So of course, he was suspended / injured since after All Out 2022 and made his long-awaited return in 2023 on the debut episode of Collision, which a lot of discussion about this was that Collision was made for Punk. He would be the main star of the show, and anyone who had an issue with him would not be making any appearances. This was proven true after he was let go, and we saw guys like Omega, Hangman Page, Jon Moxley, and the Young Bucks on the show. Basically, most of the AEW originals or close friends of the Elite, they didn't appear on Collision until after Punk had left. So Punk's return was doubtful to even be happening, but I feel like, and this is just my opinion, he probably decided to return to see if things would change and maybe he could work out the issues with the Elite, and obviously to make more money, because the Elite versus Punk and FTR would draw money, so you would have to be an idiot not to want that match or potential series of matches. So Punk will return and join up with FTR to feud with Bullet Club Gold. Resulted in some good 6-man tag matches and regular tag matches, as I mentioned earlier with FTR. Samoa Joe was also involved here, as we saw him part of that 6-man tag in Punk's first match back, and then again in the Owen Cup in a one-on-one match. Punk would then go on to be in the finals of the Owen Cup against Ricky Starks, and he would fall short and put Ricky over. I feel like fans started to sour on Punk after he won the world title because he was beating a guy like Page, who had that amazing run to finally become a world champion. But come on, it's CM Punk. You can't tell me that if you were the owner of a wrestling company that you wouldn't make him your world champion. Alright, maybe now I could see if you had second thoughts, but in early 2022, this was before the injuries and the backstage issues started to pile up. So yeah, you can't tell me that Punk at that point, you would not give him a world championship, especially after being gone for 7 years. Anyways, my point is that CM Punk is a guy who's willing to work with anyone, and if the story makes sense, he's going to put someone over. When he returned, he worked with guys like Daniel Garcia, Pentagon, Hobbs, Bobby Fish, and QT Marshall, just to name a few. But he's not going to lose to these types of people at that time because he had just returned, like I said, from being gone for 7 years. But he still put on longer than necessary matches with these people because in my eyes, I mean, he does care at the end of the day to push new people and to see young wrestlers succeed. I think, call me crazy, but that's how I see it. Otherwise, I mean, look at guys like Brock Lesnar. Like, he could have just sat home or been on commentary doing nothing until the pay-per-view. I mean, obviously, I think Brock Lesnar cares to a certain extent to get people over, but I think the case is still there. CM Punk was there almost every week on AEW, as opposed to somebody like Brock Lesnar, who wasn't. And now even Roman Reigns. Like, not even John Cena at his popularity took that much time off. And I'm sorry, but Roman Reigns, not on the level of any of those guys. Cena, Rock, Austin, Taker, Triple H, Shawn, Brett, Punk, Bryan even. But I digress. Back to what I was saying. The program that he had with Ricky was probably going to end with a huge push for Ricky Starks. Now, I don't think that he was going to dethrone Punk for the fake, real world championship that he was carrying, but I think that he was bound for bigger things after his feud with Punk, bigger than teaming up with Big Bill. I still think they wanted to get to MJF versus Punk Part 3, where MJF would get the win and become the undisputed world champion. Instead, what we got was Punk versus Samoa Joe, part who knows what at Wembley. This would be the end for CM Punk in AEW, as he would reportedly get into an altercation backstage, once again with Jack Perry, and supposedly went after the boss Tony Khan. He would be fired by the end of the week, as Tony Khan would announce on the next episode of Collision in Chicago of all places, and this was also right before All Out. Doing all of this over, I would have done Jay White versus CM Punk at All In, because it would have been the first time ever one-on-one match between these two, instead of a match that we've had seen a couple weeks before. Then you make Punk put over Ricky at All Out, giving him the world title, or the fake world title. Then at Grand Slam, you have MJF versus Ricky to crown the real world champ if you want to do that. And then you move on to Samoa Joe versus MJF. I'm not saying that Joe versus Punk was not worthy for Wembley, but if that was your plan, save that first AEW meeting for All In. And also just have CM Punk finish out All Out and that weekend. Like, the guy has a contract at the end of the day. Pretty sure that one more week / one more match versus a guy that he's already shown that he's willing to put over. I'm pretty sure maybe Punk could have been talked into doing this, and then at the end he could have been paid out his contract and granted a release. Otherwise, contractually speaking, even though I'm not a lawyer, Tony Khan could have sued for damages, emotional distress, or something like that if Punk didn't want to go through with all of this. And it could have been a bigger situation than it was, legally speaking. And I don't think Punk wanted that, as we've seen. Like, we haven't heard anything about Punk or AEW suing each other because of all of this. So, yeah, I think you just make Punk work that next week in Chicago just to finish out that week and that pay-per-view. And you give Ricky Starks something. When Punk disappeared, Ricky Starks was just left to nothing, basically. And I think that has hurt Ricky Starks the most. You can say whatever you want about Hangman Page, the Elite, the Bucks, Jack Perry. I think on TV, that hurt Ricky Starks the most, was CM Punk leaving. But anyways, in my book, besides MJF, the 2.5 month CM Punk return was still some of the best TV in AEW in all of 2023. I don't care what anyone says, or if you want to call me a CM Punk mark, you're damn right I am. But we move on to a guy I was considering should retire last year, but then brought me back with his matches in 2022. We are now talking about Chris Jericho. If we want to use an analogy here, I think he had 2 more gallons in the tank in 2022. He used one of those gallons up, and in 2023, up until now, he's just running on fumes. It's crazy that if you told me in 2012 that in 10 years, Chris Jericho would still be putting on classics in the ring and defending the ROH title, I probably would have called you an idiot, never spoke to you again. But yeah, Jericho finished 2022 on a high note, even after losing a world title, even though the ROH title doesn't really count. But in my opinion, that was all she wrote for Chris. He began a feud with Ricky Starks after putting over Action Andretti in a random upset win on the Winter is Coming edition of Dynamite in 2022. The feud with Ricky was okay, even going into the match at Revolution. And I say it was an okay match because even though the match was mid, Jericho did still put over Ricky Starks at that point. And Ricky was climbing that mountain because he had just won that Eliminator tournament to become world champion. He had that good feud with MJF. And then to beat someone like Jericho. Then Jericho moved on to feud with a returning Adam Cole. But this feud was all over the place. And the match was also a disappointment. I don't know. I didn't like the way Britt Baker was included into the feud. It seemed unnecessary for her to be there. But she's one of the top women. And to see her as vulnerable as she was, it didn't make any sense. If this was the Attitude Era, we could have seen Jericho at least put her in the Walls of Jericho or something. Something you could easily fake, but also make it come off as a terrible act for Adam Cole to want to get revenge for his girlfriend and warrant an unsanctioned match. The way that they did it, Britt Baker and Saraya should have had the lights out match. After Double or Nothing though, Jericho would start a new program with Sting. This would be a series of tag matches. At Forbidden Door, it was Jericho, Sammy, and Minoru Suzuki versus Sting, Darby, and making his AEW debut, Tetsuya Naito. It was a one-off for Naito, so we didn't see much of what he could do. I think he's past his prime though in terms of Dave Meltzer 5-star classics every night. I might be wrong, but I haven't seen Tetsuya Naito since before COVID, and I don't keep up with New Japan, so he could still be putting on classics, I just don't know it. Then Sting and Darby had a tornado tag match where Sting almost died about 5 times. Nothing new, but this was some of the scariest spots that I could recall seeing from Sting, but somehow he kept getting up. They would beat Jericho and Sammy to move on from this feud, and now Chris was in a spot where he had nothing going on. For the first time in AEW, he was no longer the first, second, or even probably top 5 on the show. This is where we see Don Callis come in, and he tried to lure Jericho into joining him to form a new faction. So for the next couple of weeks, Callis would make his pitches to Jericho while the JAS was still together. The JAS would basically tell Jericho that they did everything for him, while Chris never did anything for the group, which I 100% agreed with. Reasoning was there for this group to disband, even though I don't get why there was no follow-up with any of these guys getting revenge on Jericho except for Sammy, but we'll get into that. So now the JAS split up and is no more. Jericho did actually agree to partner with Don, but Don did not expect to get that answer, so instead he was ready for Jericho to say no, and he got Will Ospreay ready to attack Jericho. So this set up Wembley where it would be Jericho versus Ospreay, but the way we got here was nonsensical because the reveal of Jericho saying yes and the Don Callis swerve was done poorly in my opinion. Don is a smart guy, right? At least in his own head. So why would he bring out that picture if he wanted Jericho, even if he expected a no? If anything, why not Callis just tell Jericho that he was playing him to weaken him up for his new client, Will Ospreay? You could make up that this was to get Will a match on the All-In card against a legend like Jericho so that he can make a name for himself. But then we get to the match at Wembley, and the match was okay for a 2023 Chris Jericho match, but mid for a 2023 Will Ospreay match. I know that they burned the Omega match at Forbidden Door, but just save it for this show. Come on. Instead, you had Omega in a trios tag match. It would be like having Shawn Michaels in a tag match at WrestleMania. You just don't do it. Just give us the third Omega and Ospreay match, even if you booked it on Forbidden Door. So at Wembley, obviously, Jericho lost to Will, and then he had a match with Sammy at Grand Slam because Guevara was jealous or something. They had the match, and after Sammy turned on Chris, almost identical to when Chris kicked Shawn in the dick back at WrestleMania 19. And I want to point this out, not just in wrestling, but in general. Can we just stop recreating moments? Like, yeah, it's wrestling, so kicking someone in the balls is common, but they had the same color scheme and they reacted the same way. Do it, but just make it your own. You can put a little reference here, but don't just redo the whole thing spot for spot. But yeah, Sammy turns heel, which he's better at playing at. And at the next pay-per-view, Wrestle Dream, we had a 6-man tag match between Jericho, Omega, and Kota Ibushi versus the Don Callis family. After the pay-per-view, Don added Will Hobbs to the family along with Kyle Fletcher since his partner had gotten injured and they needed a fall guy for matches involving the guys in this feud. But then Omega and Jericho continued to team up, even calling themselves the Golden Jets. But on the Callis family side, one guy would be the main guy, then be forgotten about the next week. Sammy got injured, I guess, and then he disappeared from TV. And then Takeshita and Hobbs were cooled off after beating Omega and Jericho in singles matches respectively. The reason I say they were cooled off is because instead of them two being elevated, Jericho and Omega would become contenders for the tag titles, which I've already mentioned, but they were the ones who were pushed instead of Hobbs and Konosuke. Still don't like how Jericho, of all people, has been a part of all this stuff. I would think that he would be the first one to call something out for not making sense, and that he has the position in the company to change it if it doesn't make sense. Now with Revolution, instead of maybe ending this program, it gets even more weird because Don Callis family members face each other just because it's a good match on paper. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for this. Takeshita versus Ospreay, that's going to be a great match, but why? Explain it or create the reasoning other than it's a dream match and just to have friendly competition. Like, this was all built in 1 week. Like, did they not know the scheduling between everybody, and that's why they were like, oh, I guess we do have Will Ospreay, but we didn't have time to build anything, so let's just book him against Takeshita, of all people. The person in his own group. And now, what does Jericho do? Just finish it, and please either put Jericho in a position where he is the side dish and not the main course. Look at what Sting has done in AEW and as a wrestler in the later part of your career, and use that as a blueprint for older legends. Somebody like a Chris Jericho. Otherwise, I'm over Jericho in AEW. Again, at least as the main part of a storyline. If he can still do stuff in small doses, I'll take it, but it's getting to that Undertaker late 2010s level for Chris. I mean, he himself also puts himself in situations where he needs to be amazing, and he keeps under-delivering. End of the day, it's Chris Jericho, so I'm never going to say keep him off TV for good if he's available, but I can't be the only one that feels this way when he's on TV. Even his promos have been lacking. Say what you want about Punk in the ring, but at least on the mic, he still delivers. That's not the same thing that I can say with Chris Jericho promos as of late. But now moving on to another AEW mainstay, Jon Moxley. Now, I might be pissing off some people by saying this, but the same thing I feel about Jericho, I feel about Moxley. But the guy has just been there too much for no reason at times. After his feud with MJF at Full Gear, it was rumored that he was going to be taking a vacation, and that was rumored multiple times since then, but he's still there every single week. And he stayed there to feud with Hangman Page. This was a result of their Title Tuesday 2022 match on Dynamite, where Hangman got a concussion and he returned to get his revenge. And they built a match, and this time Hangman injured Moxley and got the win. So they went to a third match where Moxley got a roll-up win. So this would lead up to another match at Revolution where it was a Texas death match. And I'm just going to say, if they are making this the Hangman stipulation from now on, why don't they just call it something else? Because last I checked, Page is not from Texas. At least bill him from Texas or call it like a cowboy death match. Anyways, Hangman got the victory there, and after 4 matches you would think that would be it. But nope, again, AEW with their long ass feuds. This started with a match on Dynamite in October, and now we are in March of 2023. It's barely in the third inning, as Paul Heyman would say. I'm going to say most of the feud there between just those two guys was pretty entertaining, even with it going to 4 matches in 5 or so months. Then after Revolution, the Dark Order, who had been terribly booked, was thrown into this because they are friends with Hangman, even though Adam Page has denounced them several times. This are they, aren't they relationship with Page and the Dark Order has been poorly managed going all the way back to 2021 when he almost joined them, but didn't. And then add to that, Silver, Uno, Reynolds, Grayson, they always disappear from TV for weeks at a time. And then they throw them back on TV expecting us to care or remember about this relationship that they think they have with Hangman. And I know this is not going to happen, but they need to always be with Page or decisively end that connection between Page and the Dark Order. I'm just tired of seeing them come back to save Page out of nowhere, like either make them a credible stable or end that whole thing. And then after the Elite lost the titles to the House of Black at Revolution, there was a 3-way trios match on Dynamite that House of Black won that also included the Elite. And after the match, there was a brawl, but earlier that same show, Hangman and Moxley were also brawling, which ended up intertwining into the end of this same Dynamite. When Page got into the ring, Mox and the BCC was about to attack Page 3-1, but since the Elite were out there as well, they backed up Hangman as we saw a potential reunion of these 4 after 2 or 3 years. Later, BCC attacked Kenny Omega on another episode of Dynamite. After a great match he had with Vikingo, Hangman Page came out to save him, but this led to a miscommunication between the two and also set up a future turn for Don Callis. So when Bryan Danielson made a return after being gone for a couple weeks, he cut a promo on the amateurs of AEW, calling out the Elite and their friends basically. He vowed that the BCC would fix AEW by taking out the amateurs. They took out Page after Bryan drove a screwdriver into the eye, and then the BCC also took out some of the stooges of the Elite, Brandon Cutler and Nakasawa, which the Young Bucks couldn't sit back and watch even though it took them a couple minutes for them to come out after the BCC destroyed their quote-unquote friends. Either way, this now turned into a BCC versus Elite feud, and Don Callis, who was managing Omega, also involved himself by getting Konosuke Takeshita to join forces and to help Omega fight the BCC. But Takeshita also thought of Danielson as a mentor, so his undecisiveness cost him because he got taken out by Danielson and he used the same screwdriver again. A match between Omega and Moxley was made inside a steel cage, another good match in the series, and at the end of that match, after the cage was broken because of a V-trigger, Don Callis came inside and appeared to be saving Omega from the screwdriver, but instead used it against him to allow Mox to get the win, and Callis turned on his meal ticket to start off the Don Callis family with Konosuke. After that, when Callis was trying to explain his actions, Omega got attacked by the BCC once again, but with the help of the Young Bucks and a returning Hangman Page, they reunited and announced that they would be taking on the BCC in the Anarchy in the Arena match for Double or Nothing. This was another great match, even though it did have a lackluster ending in my opinion. I feel like AEW started doing these matches, not the Anarchy in the Arena, but just matches in general, where they wanted to end matches with shenanigans, but they didn't take into consideration the other spots that would be happening in the match. This Anarchy match had so many times where it could have ended, but instead it ends with a screwdriver to the head and a roll-up by Wheeler fucking Yuta. Listen, I know that a screwdriver was a good call because it was used over and over during this storyline, but this match had spots that were way more brutal. Not only that, you have Wheeler get the win over Omega, and what did this do for Yuta? Absolutely nothing. I know that comes off as harsh, but Yuta has been given multiple chances to get over, and he's fallen flat every time. Now, I will give AEW credit because after this attempt failed again to get Wheeler over, they've kept him at a low-level mid-carder, which is fine with me. He can wrestle his heart out, but he has nothing else to make him stand out. Anyways, the BCC win Anarchy in the Arena, but the rivalry is not over. We head to Blood and Guts, a feud between two men, Mox and Hangman Page. has now turned into a feud with 10 men, maybe 14, if you count Okada and the Best Friends, who also had some back and forth with the BCC during this time, and also the Dark Orders, so 18 men involved really, and 19 if you count Don Callis. Kota Ibushi and Pac were also thrown into this to fill up the match to make it a 5-on-5. At this point, I had completely tuned out of this feud, except for the Blood and Guts match. AEW is still going to make sure that they deliver on these types of hardcore matches. Hey, as much as we complain, I got to thank these guys for what they do to their bodies for the show. I mean, just look at this. The big spot this time around was surrounding a board with nails. I know it's fake and all, but I don't know what you would have to give me, money-wise, to agree to take a spot on that board. Hangman Page and Moxley feud is finally done. It only took us 10 months. It resulted in the Elite reunited with Adam Page, and Jon Moxley found excuses to bleed every other match. And that will continue in a 3-way with Trent and Pentagon. They had a 3-way match and Trent ended up winning, and that was another hardcore bloodfest. Then we saw the Best Friends versus Mox and Claudio in a backstage brawl where the BCC got a win back. This would not be the end because we had a stadium show to book, so we need a stadium stampede match. 5-on-5 where we would see BCC with Ortiz and Santana versus the Best Friends, Pentagon, Orange Cassidy, and Eddie Kingston, who had also made a return back around Forbidden Door to team up with the Elite, which I actually forgot about. So add to those 19 men from earlier, we had Eddie Kingston, Rocky Romero, Shota Umino, and Tomohiro Ishii. 23 fucking people in one feud. At the time, I was low-key confused at times with who was aligned with who, and now looking back on it, now I know why. They introduced way too many people into this mix for no reason, and somehow Ortiz, Santana, Penta, and Rey Fenix are now also wrapped up in all of this. I'm not going to count them because it's now a separate feud from BCC and the Elite, but anyways, if I hadn't mentioned it before, they delivered another great hardcore street fight at All In with that stadium stampede. It ended with Orange Cassidy picking up the win. Unlike Wheeler Yuta, I'm okay with this because Cassidy had now been international champion for like 10 months, and he was headed into a program with Jon Moxley, which would take place the next week at All Out in Chicago. I've covered the international title scene already, so Moxley went on to feud with Orange and some injuries for the next couple of months, and then finished up by losing to Cassidy at Full Gear. Then they would announce the Continental Classic, a round-robin tournament, which I thought would be on the level of the G1 in Japan. It doesn't have the lineage of the G1, so maybe in a couple years we can see this tournament as a bigger deal, but I was not a huge fan of half the entrants that were in this tournament. Not because I'm not a fan of the wrestlers themselves or don't think that they deserve to be in a tournament like this. I just didn't see what guys like Rush, Jay Lethal, or Daniel Garcia had done to qualify into this tournament. And again, I was done with Jon Moxley wrestling so much on TV, but this meant that I had to watch another 7 matches in a row because he would make it all the way to the finals versus Eddie Kingston, who had beat Danielson to get to the finals in his group. Eddie did win the ROH World title and the New Japan something or another title, and he was going into this tournament putting both of them on the line to create a Triple Crown champion to whoever won the tournament, which, spoiler alert, it was Eddie who won the whole thing. As soon as they had him lose 2 matches in a row, and I knew that both belts were on the line, the comeback story basically wrote itself, and they kind of threw it at your face that Eddie Kingston was the one that was going to win this. But looking back on it, why not give it to Swerve? I know him being the winner of that tournament would make him the undisputed #1 contender, so if you still want to get to the 3-way with Hangman Page, make Adam Page win matches. Then if he beats Swerve in a match, he gets the title shot instead. Then it ends like it did with a draw, and there you go, you still get to the 3-way match at Revolution. But no, you give it to Eddie Kingston and then you bury him on ROH TV and Rampage. I'm not saying that he's buried like he takes losses, I'm saying that he's buried because nobody's watching ROH or Rampage. There is where he defends these belts against guys who win 1 match after he had to win a 6-person group and then 2 other eliminator matches against Moxley and Danielson, but now this generic cowboy wannabe named Keith, he gets a title shot and then he loses, but he still gets a contract with AEW. Makes absolutely no sense, and I blame Jon Moxley. No, of course I'm going to blame AEW for booking this hot garbage after what should have been a great tournament that had us anticipating it next year. But if this is what they're going to give us, just scrap it. I don't really care for it. And since this tournament, Jon Moxley really hasn't done much. FTR, Mox, and Claudio had nothing going on. Just leave them off TV and have them return after the pay-per-view to start a fresh program. Instead, they already gave us the first match, and now we're burning through the rematch in a matter of 3 weeks. with guys who we've consistently been seeing on TV have matches. You have him show up every week doing the same thing over and over with no break. That makes fans get tired of a person. Yeah, he gets a reaction, but AEW crowds are marks, including myself, before anyone gets triggered. You hit that music, we are going to go along for what you give us, even though we might be getting sick of it. I promise you, most people were not on board with Joe versus Punk at Wembley. But what did we do? We went along for it because we respect those wrestlers. I don't hate Jon Moxley, so I won't ever say to get rid of him. You're going to get more from him being missed than from him being overused. Let me know if you think the same, or if I'm just being a crybaby wrestling fan. I don't know, you tell me. But someone who is almost on that same get off my TV level is Bryan Danielson. No, I'm just fucking around. You probably thought I was serious, didn't you? Nah, I wouldn't say that about Danielson, at least at this point. Unlike Jon Moxley, Danielson really doesn't wrestle as much, which I'm okay with. He might be putting over guys that he really shouldn't, but if he really believes in them, who am I to tell him not to? And also, he barely loses. It's more that his matches go too long with certain wrestlers who really shouldn't be able to keep up with him, especially if he's supposed to be this great technical wrestler. Either way, he's one of AEW's big stars. After Full Gear 2022, where he was feuding with Jericho and the JAS, he moved on to the world title. After MJF had taken out William Regal after he helped him win the world title at Full Gear, Bryan called out MJF and was next in line for the title. In typical MJF feuds, at least up to that point, Danielson was made to wrestle a couple guys before he faced MJF, which I'm glad they moved away from this formula with Max, because the face always won or got their match with MJF anyways. So then at Revolution 2023, it would be MJF versus Bryan for the world title in a 60-minute Iron Man match. I had been waiting since 2021 for either Punk or Bryan to be in one of these matches, and we finally got it. It was even better that they saved this for the pay-per-view, and for some reason this made people believe MJF could wrestle. I never doubted his in-ring work, so I'm not sure where the narrative from the fans came from. He had good matches in 2020 with Jungle Boy and Jon Moxley on pay-per-view, Cody, Full Gear 2019, his matches with Jericho, Punk, and Darby in 2021. I always thought that MJF was able to keep up in the ring and put classics on, especially on pay-per-view. Danielson versus MJF to me was just two great pro wrestlers having an Iron Man match, but for the storyline, this was Danielson trying to see if MJF could go in the ring, and that would be the constant in Bryan's matches in AEW. Can you hang with him bell to bell? After his loss to MJF, Bryan would return to help Moxley fighting the Elite. At Forbidden Door 2023, we will get the dream match between Okada and Bryan. I haven't gone back to rewatch this match, but I can't remember this delivering on the dream match hype, partly because of the injury that Danielson got in the match, so this was really forgotten about, at least in my books. Bryan would be injured until September, where he would make a quick comeback because Tony Khan wanted to make it up to the fans for having to fire CM Punk. Danielson took the spot of Punk in the feud with Ricky Starks. At All Out in Chicago, Bryan would beat Starks in a strap match and then again in a Texas death match on an episode of Collision. So, all of Starks' built up momentum when he was feuding with Punk had been for nothing basically. Then Ricky ended up winning the tag team titles with Big Bill as a consolation prize. Danielson would also have a feud with Zack Sabre Jr. in another dream match for Wrestle Dream. This time I think this did live up to the hype because I've watched this match like 3 times since then. Bryan did end up getting the win, and they would tease a second match because Zack claims that he did not lose to a real wrestling move, so he wants another match, which I am all for. I did not think that I would like that match because I'm not a big fan of the hold and submission matches, but this was an exception. And if you noticed in that match, unless I'm wrong, they never went to the outside of the ring, which you rarely see that in matches nowadays. Then Bryan would have a quick stint in the TNT title picture where he beat Strickland for a shot at Christian on Collision. Ricky Starks and Big Bill will cost him the match. I don't know if he was going to continue feuding with Starks after this because he would have a random match with Okada and Orange Cassidy. All of a sudden Okada was back in AEW, no tease or anything. But just like at Forbidden Door, again Bryan would get injured and he would be out for another couple of weeks until the start of the Continental Classic. As I mentioned earlier, he made it to the finals and he continues to feud with Eddie Kingston. I don't know why, and I'm sure this man doesn't give a fuck, but is anyone else getting tired of Eddie Kingston? Like, not him wrestling, but his character. It seems like he's always whining and complaining. At first, I was like, yeah, fuck everyone in the back for not giving this guy a chance. He's pretty good on the mic. Give him his opportunities. But now it's still him crying about the people who would talk shit about him for looking and acting like he does. First with Punk, then with Claudio, and now with Bryan. You know how they would say about CM Punk, if multiple people had issues with him in AEW, there is some truth about Punk being an asshole? Well, the same could be said about Eddie Kingston, right? A lot of people seem to have issues with him, so maybe he doesn't have what it takes to be in the top pro wrestling company. And obviously that top promotion isn't going to want him as their champion either. So yeah, Bryan's still feuding with Eddie Kingston. They did have the match at Revolution, which I'll cover at the end of this video. And now with Ospreay also in AEW, and Bryan being a top guy, supposedly he's going into his last full year in wrestling. At this year's All In at Wembley, I wonder what Danielson is going to do. Ospreay is probably the only dream match that I can see that can still be able to sell itself, and that hasn't happened before. But maybe they want to rematch either Okada or the rematch with Zack in his home country, or do they put him in the world title picture with whoever the champion is at the time? Bryan Danielson, that is. I'm down for any of those possibilities, but really, now that I've said that, I don't think we're going to see any of those choices because life isn't fair, right? But someone who I hope could be a champion by the time All In happens is Swerve Strickland. I never thought that I would say that about this guy, but his time after Keith Lee has been really impressive. Well, since around Double or Nothing 2023, where he had his matches with Orange Cassidy. Imagine in 2019 saying that Orange Cassidy would be putting people over. Nobody would believe you. Swerve did end up feuding with Keith Lee, but that was all over the place. We saw fake Brock Lesnar and Rick Ross team up with Swerve and then disappeared and got replaced with Brian Cage and some guys that I still haven't learned the names of. He also got Prince Nana as his manager, which I thought was just some random indie manager who was cringe, but I've come to like this stable with the exception of the two guys. But I guess Swerve does need guys in his stable when they want to protect him from taking a clean loss in a tag team match. So then after his matches for the international title, what really opened my eyes was his match with Hiroshi Tanahashi on Collision. Now, if you saw this match, you have to admit Tanahashi is losing to Father Time and had his troubles in that match, but somehow Swerve was able to keep that match from going too far off the rails and basically saved Tanahashi from hurting himself a couple times in that match. From doing that and then also helping Nick Wayne look great in his debut, I was on the Swerve bandwagon at that point. Then he started to feud with Darby and Sting after an attempted murder on Nick Wayne by him and AR Fox. As I mentioned earlier, he kicked Fox out of the group and teamed up with Christian Cage to face Darby and Sting in the coffin match, where he was the one who ended up losing the match for the team, even though his dreads were outside of the coffin. Just saying. And then when Swerve came out the next time on Dynamite, it was to confront Hangman Page. This was the beginning of the rise for Strickland into the main event picture. His promos were top tier. His matches with Page were some of the best matches in AEW in 2023, including the Texas Death Match at Full Gear. Somehow, AEW continues to top themselves in brutality with their hardcore matches. Unlike WWE, it's not the same repetitive spots with their no DQ matches over there. You really never know what to expect in AEW. And even when you see the same weapon, it might be used in a completely different way than we've seen before. Like with the barbed wire or thumbtacks, we were like, alright, someone's going to land on it and that's going to be the spot. But no, they will create some new shit every time. Or they'll introduce new weapons like Trent's mom's van, or skewers, or an exploding pair of Jordans. Like, bruh. A++++ for creativity there. Anyways, back to Swerve. He surprisingly got the big push in his feud with Hangman by winning both of his matches in 2023. Then he would go on to be in the semifinals of the Continental Classic. He has been pushed way more than Eddie since World's End. So having him win that tournament would have made the next year's Continental Classic a little bit more important because Swerve won and got a title shot right after. That could mean the same for whoever won it next, making it their version of the G1 or King of the Ring when that was its own pay-per-view back in the day. But either way, Swerve came into 2024 looking to become champion. They brought back the rankings, and as we got closer to Revolution, there were two guys at the top of the list, Hangman and Swerve. They would end up having the third match on Dynamite to see who would be the number one contender. It would end up in a draw, which, again, the protection for Swerve here, not to have him lose to Page, is underlooked. He's lost to Mox and Bryan, but they won't have him job to Page. I gotta admit, that is some serious restraint shown by AEW not to want to keep both guys at an even level. Usually, as we saw with Page and Moxley, I think they had 4 matches and they ended up 2-2. MJF and CM Punk also, they were 1-1 pending a final third match. FTR and the Young Bucks finally had their rubber match after 3 years. I mean, the track record is there for AEW wanting to keep rivals on a level playing field. So at Revolution, it was a 3-way match for the AEW World title after the draw on Dynamite. Joe versus Swerve versus Page. I mean, take my money. One thing about keeping guys on the same level is that when you make a 3-way for a title, it really can end up with anyone winning. And even though Paige has been on a losing streak to Swerve, it's still believable that Paige could have walked out as the champion, because since he's never beat Swerve, maybe in a 3-way situation, he could take advantage. And on the other hand, you can have Swerve, who's red hot. You can see him winning to continue his momentum. Or since Joe just beat MJF, who was the longest reigning champion, you could also see Joe keeping it for a longer time, just to stretch out the reign and not make it feel so short. But next we talk about the guy who Samoa Joe beat to become the world champion, that being MJF. We start back at Full Gear 2022 after MJF won the AEW title and started his year-plus long reign as champion. Alright, so that does it for the video. Catch you guys on the next one. No, I'm just kidding. I hope nobody clicked off. Imagine that I ended it like that. But leave a like if you got this far into the video. That's hard to believe if you did. But yeah, MJF, best thing in AEW all year, hands down. And looking back, that is surprising that a guy had the belt for that long, and for the majority of the time, it was good TV. MJF even came out and said it himself when he started the reign. Fans would eventually turn on him and call him repetitive. I was thinking we would eventually get there too during this reign, but for me, it never got to the point where I didn't want to see him on TV. I paid attention anytime that he was on the show, from the first Dynamite he came out as world champion up until World's End. He started the reign by taking out William Regal, and he sent them back to his daddy back in WWE. Then he beat Ricky Starks to defend both AEW title and the Dynamite ring. Ricky was looking good even after his loss. We finally saw him cut some good promos against MJF, no less. Then we got the feud with Danielson that went into March of 2023. That would move him to a 4-way match at Double or Nothing versus the 4 pillars of AEW, quote unquote. Now, something that I thought MJF did well during this, and also in his feud with Ricky, he could have killed these guys verbally, but there were times that he allowed the other guys to get the last laugh on the mic. MJF probably is aware that if he destroys his opponents on the mic, nobody's going to want to see him lose. Now, nobody wanted him to lose anyway, but as long as he was playing heel, AEW fans, they're going to play along and go with the storyline by cheering the good guy. This time it was going to be Darby Allin and Jungle Boy. To me, I think this was also when Darby and Perry started to do better work on the mic. They had some good stuff when calling each other out in promos. I'm not going to lie, Sammy is still a work in progress for me. He had something going as a heel with him and Tay as a pair, but when he returned to be with the JAS through now, I really can't stand him. Reminds me of 2019 Dolph Ziggler. Can a guy wrestle and give an entertaining promo from time to time? Sure, but does anybody really care about them? Not really. So, Double or Nothing comes and goes with MJF retaining the belt in a pretty good match. MJF as world champion was coming along better than you could have expected. Usually, stuff gets repetitive and fans start to turn, but so far so good. The summer of 2023 would move us to the start of AEW's best storyline of the year. MJF will start a feud with Adam Cole, baby. On the Dynamite after Double or Nothing, Adam Cole would confront MJF and will get a chance to get a title shot, but he had to beat MJF first. On one hand, I didn't know why they would give this match away on TV, but on the other hand, it was Adam Cole versus MJF one-on-one on free TV. So, as a person who's going to buy the pay-per-view and watch all the shows, I'll take it. This is a good example of a dream match that needs no story. Even though the story was to get Cole a title shot, this was basically a 1-week build, but both of these guys are big enough stars that 1-week build is more than enough, at least for me. The match between the two was as good as you would think, but it ended with a time limit draw. So Adam Cole wanted a rematch, but MJF just wasn't going to give it to him after Cole couldn't get the job done. So AEW would have them become a tag team in a random tag team tournament in the middle of the year. This was the change MJF would need if he was going to have a long reign. A babyface turn was in the works with his new tag team. They went on to win the tournament to get a tag team title shot versus FTR. Even though they ended up losing, MJF and Cole would be the hottest thing in AEW. They were able to get the dumbest things over, and it was fun to watch all the videos and backstage stuff. The double clothesline and the kangaroo kicks. You expected one of them to turn on the other eventually, but every week we got a tease, but they would stay together and continue their friendship. After they lost to FTR, MJF decided to give Adam Cole his rematch in the biggest main event in AEW history in front of 85 trillion species in the universe at All In. Adam Cole would ask for one other thing, for MJF to team with him in the pre-show to go after the ROH tag team titles. Now this I did not like. First off, because who cares about the ROH Tag Team titles, and it just seemed like a consolation prize after losing the AEW Tag Team titles. And second of all, this did not fit MJF's character one bit. The friendship he built with Cole was one thing, but we had seen MJF call out the indie promotions and called them less than for years. So why would he give two shits about the ROH Tag Team belts? But okay, we get to Wembley and they win the ROH belts from Aussie Open in what was a good moment and start to the show. The main event was also pretty good. I think AEW did a good job with the whole show, even with a lackluster build. MJF vs. Adam Cole was arguably the only match that had a good story going into the show. But hey, the good thing is that it was the main event, so if you're going to build one match for that show, and I guess you could compare that to like boxing or UFC, basically all the undercard matches nobody really cares about, not really any story to those, everybody just cares about the main event. And this match had it all: near falls, crazy spots, a double pin, overtime, interference from Roddy Strong. It did end with a roll-up, but that was for the tease after the match when Cole was given the chance to nail MJF with the belt, but instead he decided not to and would celebrate with his so-called best friend to end All In. After this, Cole took a back seat as MJF would face Samoa Joe at Grand Slam. This was also the end of Cole, at least in the ring, because he would injure himself running to ringside. They really got to stop using that ramp and stage setup. I think like 5 people have gotten hurt on that ramp. I think Chris Daniels and Cody both ate shit when attempting to move to the outside. Bryan Danielson got his foot stuck in between the ramp and the ring. Moxley got a concussion from a dive off that ramp, and Adam Cole hurt his foot jumping from that stage as well. I don't know who has a higher body count, that ramp or Nia Jax. Then, after Samoa Joe lost the title match at Grand Slam, he would keep an eye out on MJF as he would move on to feud with Jay White, MJF that is. At this time, we would get our first look at someone pretending to be the devil. They were using MJF's devil mask to carry out attacks on different people in the lead up to Full Gear, with the Bullet Club and the devil coming for MJF. Samoa Joe would offer himself as a partner to keep MJF at 100%, but with the agreement being that Joe would get a title rematch. MJF would defend the ROH titles at Wrestle Dream in a handicap match, and again at Full Gear with Joe's help, just to keep his promise to Adam Cole that he would keep the belts until Cole was able to return from injury. I thought the feud with Jay White was okay. I don't really like when the challenger steals the belt, and that is what the feud is based off. Obviously, the attack from the devil was also a reason that Jay White wanted to beat MJF for the title, because he thought MJF was the one in the devil mask. But still, seeing MJF running after his belt and Jay White pretending to be champion, they just look like kids. I had to go back to remember what was going on, and they had MJF in like 5 different storylines at once, with Jay White, with Samoa Joe, the Acclaimed, with the devil, defending the Dynamite ring against Juice Robinson, and we also got a random title defense versus Kenny Omega. I say random because it was out of nowhere that they threw this match out there when it could have been a pay-per-view main event. And also it was random because MJF had multiple people coming after him going into the pay-per-view title match with Jay White. So even though it was for Kenny to protect his AEW title reign length record, MJF already had so much going on. It was weird to see him take on another main event guy on a random episode of Collision. I mean, that match on Collision, Kenny Omega vs MJF, if you haven't watched it, you have to go see it. Another good match in AEW of 2023. But for the match at Full Gear, I was not a fan of the whole night and what happened with MJF and Jay White. Now, the match was what it was. I'm not going to say that it was a bad match, but the injury angle with MJF at the start of the show and Adam Cole taking his place, this was all over the place. And where was Samoa Joe? Wasn't his goal to protect MJF? Either way, Joe will get his title match at World's End. Again, he would vow to protect MJF until the pay-per-view. At this point, I was just waiting for them to reveal the devil and move this storyline further. I was not really looking forward to Samoa Joe versus MJF on pay-per-view after we had seen it at Grand Slam already. The devil would continue the attacks on MJF and others to try to keep the people off the scent. They attacked the Acclaimed, Hangman Page, and it appeared that Joe was also attacked, but as we saw on the Go Home show before World's End, MJF would try to defend the ROH tag belts by himself versus Masked Men, but ended up losing. Joe would run out for the save after the match, but he fooled us all. He was fine and worked out a deal with the devil. Joe would lay out MJF to injure him even more before the match at World's End. This would actually work for the first time in wrestling, I think, where the heel challenger stood tall over the face champion on the Go Home show and actually won the title on the pay-per-view. Now, I can't tell you what happened in that match at World's End. Like I said, I was just ready for this to come to an end and the reveal of who was behind the devil mask. But Samoa Joe winning the belt did catch me by surprise. Something else that surprised me was that neither AEW or MJF made mention of the whole bidding war of 2024 that MJF had talked about years ago. I know that Tony Khan probably knows AEW fans were thinking about that in the back of our heads going into this match. I still didn't think that they would take the belt off MJF though. At the end of that match, at World's End though, they did also reveal that Adam Cole was behind the Devil Mask and aligned himself with Wardlow, Roddy Strong, and the Kingdom to form the Undisputed Kingdom, and they did it to get rid of MJF from AEW. Now that the Rumble has come and gone and most guys have their WrestleMania plans laid out, it is probably safe to say that MJF will be staying with AEW for another contract. Not saying he won't ever go to WWE, but AEW has treated him fairly and is probably paying him what he wants. So MJF probably sees that he could wait on the WWE run for a little while longer, and he'll make that jump at a later date. But now with Adam Cole leading a stable and MJF gone, I'm not sure when this is going to pick back up. If Adam is not cleared to wrestle by Double or Nothing, I wonder when they will pay this off, or if they even will. Because think about it, Adam Cole doesn't have a win on MJF. Do they have Max come back to lose? And if they have MJF beat Cole when he returns, why would they have another match after that, when MJF would have 2 wins over Cole at that point? What I could see is now that Joe retained the title and Wardlow got the title shot, I can see MJF returning to cost Wardlow the match, and then going into Double or Nothing, we have MJF versus Wardlow in a rematch from 2 years ago, which holy shit, I can't believe it's already been 2 years since then. But anyways, maybe Wardlow beats him again with the help of Adam Cole. Now this would set up Cole versus MJF Part 3. I don't know how you could stretch that out for 3 months until August for All In, which would make sense, again, just for the fact that this was where they had their last match, and this also keeps Cole and MJF away from the title picture for a while to give someone else a chance. But as we see with AEW a couple times, they don't always do what makes sense time-wise. They either blow their load too early or they let it go past the expiration date. I mean, the rematch versus Wardlow at Double or Nothing and the rematch with Cole at All In basically writes itself, but who knows where we're going to be in the next week, let alone 6 months from now. And AEW really needs something to get the excitement back from fans. So we'll see where they go when MJF returns. But that pretty much does it for all of that stuff. Let's get into the Revolution review. We started off the night. We're not going to cover the pre-show. Fuck that. The beginning of Revolution, we had Christian Cage versus Daniel Garcia. Now, this pay-per-view kind of got my excitement back a little bit for AEW. And it started a little bit when I saw the crowd that was present for this night. Now, Sting's retirement could have had something to do with it. Obviously, in Greensboro, North Carolina, a lot of people are going to show up for Sting's last match. But, I mean, this card was also pretty good and pretty stacked for what they had. It was like low-key a good card. So, Christian Cage, Daniel Garcia was the first match. It went about 15 minutes, and this was a good match to start off the show. It gave Daniel Garcia a couple near falls. Obviously, he didn't end up winning. Christian Cage, I think, is still the best person to continue with this TNT title, and he did that. So, good start to the pay-per-view. But then Eddie Kingston and Bryan Danielson in a 20-minute match. Holy shit. Now, I did say that I didn't really care about this, and I really don't. But this match did pick up at the later half of it. Now, the ending to it, we had Eddie Kingston powerbomb Bryan Danielson after a good couple of sequences from them to end this match, and Bryan Danielson did end up shaking the hand of Eddie Kingston, which was also the stipulation when Kingston and Jericho had a match. Good thing to see a change here. I thought they were going to redo the same thing where Bryan wouldn't shake his hand, but they did it, and I don't know where the BCC or Danielson or Moxley or anybody stands in that stable. Are they heels? Are they faces? Are we just not supposed to care and just go along for whatever the storyline calls for? I don't know. But Eddie Kingston won and retained the AEW Continental Championship, which I don't know why they made a title for it. I thought they were going to combine everything because he still comes out with the ROH Championship and the New Japan, whatever it's called, Open Championship. But then we had the AEW All-Star Scramble match, winner receiving a future AEW World Championship. Now, the only criticism I'm going to give this match is that there were people in this match. You call it an All-Star Scramble match, and you had guys Dante Martin, Lance Archer, and a guy named Magnus in this. What? I don't understand. But Wardlow ended up getting the win. Whatever a scramble match is, I mean, they did good for what it was. I don't know what else to say. And Wardlow gets the next title shot at the AEW Championship, so maybe it's playing out the way that I said it could play out. Wardlow versus Joe. MJF returns, costs Wardlow the match. We go on from there. MJF feuds with Undisputed Kingdom. Then we had another member of the Undisputed Kingdom, Roderick Strong, defeating Orange Cassidy for the AEW International Championship. And I'll be honest, from here until after Timeless Toni Storm versus Deonna Purrazzo, I wasn't really paying attention. This was kind of like the low point of the card for me. Strong beating Orange Cassidy, I think that was needed just to give the Undisputed Kingdom some more gold and to give Orange Cassidy a break. Again, hopefully Orange Cassidy goes away for a little bit and then you have him return to a huge pop. And then you had Jon Moxley and Claudio Castagnoli defeating FTR in a tag team match, and I didn't care about it when it was going on, and they never really got me interested or invested into it, so that was what it was. It was like 20 minutes too. It was pretty long. Then we had Timeless Toni Storm versus Deonna Purrazzo. Now this was a good match. I'm not gonna say it was bad or I wasn't interested in it. It was what it was, but like in a good way. This match served its purpose on the card, and it was good for what it was. Then you had the match that stole the night, Will Ospreay versus Konosuke Takeshita. Now, I knew this was going to be a great match. I gave it shit for not having a real storyline to it, but I did say that I was going along for the ride because Ospreay, Konosuke Takeshita was going to be a fucking banger from the start, and it lived up to the hype. I wish it would have gone like another fucking 30 minutes, to be honest with you. I don't know how that makes sense in my head. Like, Will Ospreay versus some random guy on the indies who is probably just as good, if not probably a better wrestler than Takeshita. I could care less about that match. Even if I watch it bell to bell, I'll still be like, what the fuck was that? But on AEW or New Japan, a Will Ospreay match, you could put the same... If Will Ospreay versus Takeshita was taking place on an indie like Rev Pro or something like that, I would give two shits about that match. But this match on this card, I thought it was amazing. Then we had Samoa Joe versus Hangman Page versus Swerve Strickland for the AEW World title. Now, they did swerve me, no pun intended, on the Dynamite before where Hangman Page came out injured, because I don't really keep up with the dirt sheets as much as I used to. So I thought that this was a legit injury that Hangman Page had. And then Taz and Excalibur on commentary, they were saying stuff that usually you don't hear when it's a legit injury. Like when CM Punk was injured, or when Adam Cole was talking about his injury, like the commentary is silent. But when Hangman Page came out and I heard them start talking or saying stuff, I was like, oh no, definitely this is a swerve. And luckily it was, because I don't know if Samoa Joe versus Swerve Strickland by themselves could have put on a match as good as this one. I'm just saying, on pay-per-view, I think this was the best case scenario. Samoa Joe ended up getting the win after making Hangman Page tap out. And I did like the story that they threw in there also with Hangman Page potentially just throwing the match and tapping out to keep Swerve from winning the AEW Championship. So maybe we'll get Page and Strickland again in another match. I'm fine with that if they are going down that path. But Samoa Joe retains, and he now goes on to face Wardlow for the AEW title. That's going to be his next challenger. And then the main event for the AEW World Tag Team Championships, and this was also Sting's retirement match. And I think besides a one-on-one match, they did the best that they could have with the tag team match with the Young Bucks. Now, they'll probably just vacate the World Tag Team titles, but I'm surprised that they had Sting win. Usually, or at least back in my day, the guy that was retiring would put over his opponent. We've seen it a couple times, here and there, but Sting actually came out on top. There were some great spots in this match. People going through tables and jumping off ladders and landing on glass. Like, what the fuck was going on? And Sting looked pretty good. I wouldn't doubt it if he had one more retirement match. Maybe he could be talked into doing one more match versus Darby Allin. I wouldn't really like that since they announced this as his retirement match. But as we've seen, and as I've said with wrestlers, you never really know when their last match is. They all want to come back. So we'll see if this is really Sting's last ride, or if we see him again down the line. That will kind of defeat the whole purpose of doing all of this, but it's wrestling. It is what it is with the whole promoting of his last match. Revolution as a whole was pretty good, and they kind of redeemed themselves for me personally, because I didn't think that they had been doing all that hot since All In of last year. Now, their pay-per-views, for the most part, they're always going to deliver. And this Revolution pay-per-view was a lot better than I would have expected it to be with what they have been giving us. So, can't really complain there with what they did. Now, I was planning on releasing this. First, I was trying to do it right after Revolution. And then they had the show Big Business that was coming up as well. So I was kind of sandwiched in between two shows that I could have released this video for. And I actually decided just to drop it before Big Business. And most likely what's going to happen at that show, it's in Boston, the hometown of Mercedes Moné. So that's probably going to be the big reveal. I don't know what they do at that show, who she comes after. The only thing I can think of would be for the title, but do you really want to see Mercedes in a title match that quick? Even if they come in and their first pay-per-view is a title match, like they still build them up on TV to get them wins and to warrant a title match, as we saw with Deonna Purrazzo. So Mercedes Moné, maybe she comes in, and we are in March, so then maybe by Double or Nothing, even by Dynasty, at the end of April, we have about 6 weeks or so. So maybe we can see Mercedes get some wins, some matches on AEW TV, and then we do the title match at Dynasty. But I don't really like that they added all these pay-per-views because it kind of takes away the shine of the big four that they had to begin AEW. And you would say Double or Nothing would be the show to wait and do big matches at. But now with the pay-per-views thrown in between almost every month, you have to put something on those shows as well. So then you're just kind of burning through some of these matches that you could really be waiting for. I'm still going to be an idiot and shell out my $50 every single month, but hey, as long as they keep giving us pay-per-views like Revolution and World's End even, I'm down. If they're going to give us All Out 2023 type of pay-per-views, I'm out. No pun intended. So with that, the only thing that I can see for Big Business that I probably would have added on here, maybe we see the return of MJF to cause Wardlow the title match, and Mercedes Moné making her debut in AEW officially. So, let me know what your thoughts have been on AEW over the last year and a half. And also, what matches do you think we'll see? Because also, like I had thought, maybe we could have waited until All In at Wembley. Will Ospreay and Bryan Danielson, whatever you want to call him. He came out and confronted Will Ospreay. Again, AEW doing some good things here. Hopefully, they get back on the right track and get hot again. In the wrestling business, you're never really out until you're out, like WCW or ECW. I mean, look at TNA. They've been around for about 30 years, probably. No, they've been around for like 20 years, I think. Even they get a little buzz here and there. So, AEW is going to be an up and down battle. We just got to go through the lows, and hopefully they get back to the highs. And I think 2024, with what I've seen in the last 2-3 weeks, the pay-per-view Revolution, and what we got coming up, I mean, it could be do or die this year. You know, either they're going to keep all the fans and bring some back, or they're going to just keep losing people, and I don't think that they can take another year like they did in 2023. If they keep going lower, I think that's going to be a problem, but if they stay at the level they're at right now, and a lot of people probably think that they're at a low level now, but if they stay here, I think they'll be around for a while. So, you know, when free agents from WWE or if other stars from other promotions get big, like Okada making his debut in AEW, obviously he was a big free agent that's now coming over to the States for the first time. Jay White, Will Ospreay, if they wait and are around long enough, they can snatch some guys from WWE, and likewise, guys that have done everything that they could in AEW, like an MJF, maybe a Wardlow, maybe even a Kenny Omega. You never rule anything out. Edge, Bryan Danielson, Chris Jericho, maybe they want to go back and finish their careers in WWE. You know, things can change back and forth with who is hot at what time. And that's the best case scenario for the wrestling business. And I'm here to watch good pro wrestling, so WWE, AEW, I don't really care who's doing better. I just want to see good TV. So until the next time, remember to subscribe and give the video a like if you enjoyed all of this. And a quick plug, if you're into old school WWF or Raw episodes, this is the channel for you. Go check out my other content. And we're going to be going through all the Raw episodes. We started in 1993. We're going to go all the way up until 2014 because really since 2015. There's a podcast for basically all the shows since then, so I don't really need to go back and do it. But until the next AEW review, if that's the only thing that you care for, I'll be back one day or another. So I am out.